My father called to tell me he was getting remarried. I smiled and said, "Congratulations." Then I hung up and sat completely still for 11 minutes. Not because I was heartbroken, not because I was jealous, but because I already knew exactly who she was and what she had done to my mother. Stay with me, because this story doesn't end where you think it does. And if you've ever had to choose between loyalty and comfort, you're going to feel every single second of this. My name is Seren, Seren Voss, and before I tell you what I did, let me tell you who I was before all of this broke open. I grew up in a world that looked perfect from the outside. Big house, private schools, a father whose name appeared in financial headlines, and a mother who never once made you feel like the money was the point. My mother, Renata, she was the kind of woman who remembered how you took your tea, who sent handwritten notes for things most people would just text. She was quiet in the way that mattered, the kind of quiet that made a room feel safer just because she was in it. My father, Aldrich Voss, built his empire from nothing, genuinely nothing, and my mother stood beside him through every difficult, uncertain, humbling year of that climb. They weren't a fairy tale. They argued, they had hard seasons, but they were real, and real is so much more valuable than perfect. Then, 2 years ago, my mother got sick. Cancer. It moved fast, faster than any of us were prepared for, and just like that, the woman who had held our entire world together was gone. After she died, my father and I found a careful distance between us. He buried himself in boardrooms, I buried myself in work abroad, architecture projects, travel, anything that kept my hands too full to feel. We called on Sundays, we were polite, we were fine. We were not fine. But from the outside, Aldrich Voss composed Billionaire, Seren Voss, his accomplished daughter, a family that survived loss with grace. And then came the phone call that unraveled everything. Her name was Petra Halden. My father said it so casually, like it was just a name, like it meant nothing. "She's a gallery curator, Seren. We met at a charity event 8 months ago. I'd really love for you two to meet." His voice had that careful, practiced steadiness he uses in press conferences, controlled, measured, designed to not invite follow-up questions. But I had a follow-up question, several, actually, because I'd heard that name before. 3 years ago, before my mother got sick, before everything fell apart, I noticed something shift in my parents' marriage. Nothing dramatic, no shouting, no slamming doors, just a new distance. My mother moving through the house a little quieter than usual, my father's phone face down on tables where it never used to be. Small things. The kind of small things that women notice and men assume go undetected. I went looking. I know how that sounds, but I was her daughter, and something felt wrong. And what I found was an email thread, professional in tone, careful in wording, between my father and someone named P. Halden. I told myself it was nothing, business probably. I closed the laptop, and I never told my mother. And for 3 years, I carried that small, quiet decision like a stone in my pocket. Now, that stone had a face. When my father's assistant called the following week to arrange a dinner, and then the family lawyer called the day after that, I felt the pressure before I understood it. Why so much urgency? Why so many people involved in what should be a simple family dinner? You don't deploy lawyers for a casual family dinner. You deploy lawyers when you're managing something. And Aldrich Voss was definitely managing something. I told them I needed time. I said I was processing, and they accepted that, because grief is a convenient excuse, and I had earned the right to use it. But I wasn't processing. I was thinking, carefully, slowly, the way my mother used to when something didn't sit right, that long, still silence before she'd look up and say, "Something here isn't adding up." She was never wrong when she said that. and neither was I. I have a researcher. His name is Dale, former investigative journalist, sharp as a blade, and completely discreet. I've used him before for professional due diligence, background checks on business partners, contract verifications. Nothing personal. Never personal. Until now. I gave him Petra Halden's name and told him I needed a full timeline. I didn't explain why. He didn't ask. 3 days later, a folder landed in my inbox. Plain, unmarked, 12 pages. I made tea before opening it. I don't know why. Some instinct told me I needed to be settled before I read it. Because once I knew, I couldn't unknow. I should have made something stronger than tea. Petra Halden and my father did not meet 8 months ago. They met 4 years ago. The charity event story, the one my father delivered so smoothly over the phone, was constructed, fabricated from the ground up with the kind of detail that only comes from practice. 4 years ago, which meant she was already in his life when I found that email thread, which meant when I told myself it was nothing and closed that laptop, it was very much something. I kept reading, and the pages got worse. There were photos, private dinners, a weekend in the south of France that my father had described to my mother as a shareholder retreat, a reservation at a restaurant in Milan, time-stamped the same week my mother first mentioned feeling tired, unusually tired, the week that eventually led to the diagnosis. And then the detail that stopped my breathing entirely. The week my mother was in her final hospitalization, the week I sat in that small white room holding her hand through the nights, my father told me he was in Geneva, urgent business. He was sorry he couldn't be there. He'd fly back the moment he could. There was a photo of him at a private dinner, with Petra, dated that same week. He was never in Geneva. My mother died with me beside her, only me, believing her husband was held up by business he couldn't escape. She never knew, and somehow that was the most devastating thing of all. I sat at my kitchen table for a very long time. The tea went cold. I didn't move. I didn't call ahead. I just drove. The whole way to my father's estate, I kept both hands on the wheel and my eyes on the road. No music, no phone calls, just the sound of the engine and my own breathing, which I had to consciously slow down every few minutes because my chest kept tightening in a way I didn't fully trust. I had no speech prepared, no list of accusations, just the folder on the passenger seat and one question. Petra was there when I arrived. Of course she was. Standing in the entrance hall like she already belonged in it, poised, polished, a practiced smile moving across her face the moment she saw me. She extended her hand. I walked past her without a word. I found my father in his study. I closed the door behind me, and I placed the folder on his desk, gently, not dramatically, and slid it toward him like a document requiring his signature. "Where were you?" I said quietly. "The week Mom died." The room went very still. I watched his face move through several expressions in the space of a few seconds. Surprise, calculation, a reaching for composure that didn't quite arrive in time. He opened his mouth, and I heard the businessman in him wake up, that voice he uses to reframe, to manage, to redirect a conversation back onto terrain he controls. And something in me just broke open. Not loudly, that's what I remember most. It wasn't loud. It was a low, shaking voice that I barely recognized as mine. I told him every date, every photo, the Geneva lie, the 4-year timeline. I told him about sitting in that hospital room alone night after night, telling my mother he was coming, telling her he was just held up, telling her he loved her, on his behalf, because he wasn't there to say it himself. "I held her hand alone," I said, "because you were with her." My father, this man who had faced boardrooms, critics, and financial collapse without flinching, put his face in his hands. I walked out. Petra was in the hallway. She started to speak. I stopped. I looked at her. really looked, and said absolutely nothing. Some silences say everything. I didn't sleep that night, but by morning, I was calm. Not the fragile kind of calm that shatters the moment someone speaks too loudly, the other kind. The kind that settles into your bones like concrete setting. The kind my mother used to carry when she'd already made a decision and was simply waiting for the right moment to act on it. I am my mother's daughter, and my mother never wasted energy on noise. I opened my laptop and I got to work. The first thing I did was call our estate lawyer. Not my father's lawyer, mine. My mother had left a will, careful, thorough, quietly powerful. Within it was a clause I had never fully activated, a formal claim that transferred a significant family portfolio, including the estate my father currently lived in, directly into my control as primary beneficiary. I had left it dormant out of grief, out of not wanting to make things harder than they already were. I activated it that morning. The second thing, my architecture firm carries a silent investment connection to the building housing Petra's gallery. A routine lease review was entirely within professional protocol. I made one call, quietly, correctly. The review was initiated that same afternoon. The third thing, my father had arranged a society announcement, their engagement, framed beautifully, timed for maximum visibility in a prestigious publication. I knew the editor. My mother had known her longer. I didn't kill the story. I simply made sure the right questions were being asked before it ran. An editor with integrity and a corrected timeline is a powerful combination. She started digging immediately. The fourth thing, my mother co-founded a charitable foundation with my father 20 years ago. I sit on the board. I called a meeting, agenda listed simply as a governance review of executive personal conduct clauses. Routine language, devastating implications. My father's chairmanship, unchallenged for 2 decades, was suddenly the subject of a formal board conversation. I didn't shout his name across a single room. I didn't make one dramatic scene. I simply restructured things. My mother was the gentlest woman I have ever known, but she raised me to understand something essential. Real power doesn't announce itself. It repositions everything quietly and lets the results speak. And the results were already speaking. It didn't happen all at once. That's not how real consequences work. It happened the way water erodes stone. Slowly, quietly, and then suddenly all at once you look and the whole landscape has changed. The wedding was postponed first. No public announcement, no explanation. Just a quiet removal of dates and a sudden unavailability from my father's office. Then, 2 weeks later, it was canceled entirely. I heard it from the estate lawyer, not from my father. He couldn't bring himself to call me about it. I understood that. Petra's gallery lease was not renewed. The building review had uncovered several procedural irregularities that required attention. All entirely legitimate. All entirely devastating for someone whose entire social identity was built on that space. The carefully curated world she had constructed, the openings, the collectors, the access, began dissolving the moment the Voss name stopped being attached to her. The society story ran, not the engagement announcement my father had planned, the other story, the corrected timeline. The editor had done her job thoroughly and fairly. It wasn't sensational. It didn't need to be. A quietly reported discrepancy in dates, a relationship that predated the official account. In certain circles, that is more than enough. Doors close very softly in that world, but they close completely. The foundation board met. My father stepped back from his chairman role pending the governance review. 20 years of that title, gone in a single formal meeting. He didn't fight it. I think by then he understood that fighting was no longer the appropriate response. He called me on a Tuesday evening. I answered this time. He didn't make excuses. He didn't reconstruct a narrative. He just said, "I know what I did, Seren." 6 words. And somehow they were both too little and the most honest thing he'd said to me in years. I told him I wasn't ready to talk about forgiveness, but I asked him to do one thing: visit my mother's grave. Alone. No prepared words, no performance. He went the following Sunday. I know because I drove there too, separately, and watched from the far edge of the cemetery. I didn't approach him. I just stood there, in the wind, and let myself cry for the first time since all of this began. It was the most relief I had felt in 2 years. People assume that being a billionaire's daughter means your life is protected, that money builds walls around you. But the truth is, money can't buy a person's presence. My mother died in a hospital room that was smaller than my father's conference table. And the only thing that mattered in that room was who showed up. Remember that, because one day, that room will be yours.